I was standing at my kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, when I saw her again. There she was, Karen from down the street, wearing that ridiculous oversized sun hat and a terry cloth robe that had seen better days. She was slipping through my backyard gate like she owned the place, which apparently she believed she did. I watched in disbelief as she dropped her robe and prepared to lower herself into my pool. What happened next made me nearly drop my coffee. The moment her feet touched the water, she let out a blood-curdling scream that could have woken the dead. She leaped backwards so fast you would have thought she had been electrocuted, her face twisted in shock and fury. Steam was actually rising from her skin as she stood there shivering, wrapping her arms around herself. The water that had been a pleasant 85 degrees just yesterday was now ice cold. Something had definitely changed, and Karen was about to find out exactly what that something was. Let me back up a bit. 6 months ago, I moved into what I thought was going to be my dream home in Maple Grove Estates. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood, with tree-lined streets and a homeowners association that promised to maintain property values and community standards. The house came with a beautiful backyard and an in-ground pool that had been the main selling point for me. After years of apartment living, I was finally going to have my own private oasis where I could relax after long days at the office. I had visions of peaceful morning swims and weekend barbecues with friends. What I did not envision was becoming the unwilling host to a middle-aged woman with an entitlement complex the size of Texas. It started small, as these things often do. I would come home from work to find wet footprints on my pool deck that definitely were not mine. At first, I chalked it up to maintenance workers or maybe a neighbor chasing after a runaway pet. Then I started noticing other things, stools that had been moved, sunscreen bottles floating in the pool, and chairs arranged differently than I had left them. The first time I actually caught sight of someone in my pool, I was returning home early from a doctor's appointment. I could see movement in the backyard through my living room window, and when I went to investigate, I glimpsed a figure quickly gathering up towels and heading toward the back gate. By the time I made it outside, whoever it was had vanished, leaving only damp footprints and the lingering scent of coconut sunscreen. I mentioned the incidents to my next-door neighbor, Bob, a retired postal worker who seemed to know everything that happened in the neighborhood. He nodded knowingly and lowered his voice, like he was sharing state secrets. "That would be Karen Mitchell," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "She lives in the big colonial 3 houses down. She is the president of the homeowners association, and apparently thinks that gives her access to everyone's amenities." Bob went on to explain that Karen had been pulling stunts like this for years. She had used other people's grills during neighborhood events, helped herself to vegetables from community gardens, and once even rearranged a neighbor's patio furniture because she thought it looked better a different way. But using someone's pool without permission? Bob shook his head. That is a new level of bold even for her. I decided to confront Karen directly. I found her address in the neighborhood directory and walked over to her house one evening after work. She answered the door wearing a floral housecoat and an expression that suggested I was interrupting something very important. "Karen Mitchell?" I asked politely. "I am your new neighbor from Willow Street. I was hoping we could discuss my pool." Her demeanor changed instantly. The fake smile disappeared, replaced by a look of barely concealed irritation. "Oh, you must be the antisocial one," she said, not inviting me in. "I have heard about you from the other neighbors. Never attend community meetings. Never participate in neighborhood activities." I was taken aback by her immediate hostility but pressed on. "I think there has been a misunderstanding. Someone has been using my pool without permission, and I was told it might be you." Karen's eyes narrowed. "That pool is community property," she declared as if stating an obvious fact. "The homeowners association has oversight of all neighborhood amenities." "I am sorry, but that is not correct," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "The pool is on my private property and was part of my home purchase. It is not a community amenity. Everything in Maple Grove Estates falls under homeowners association jurisdiction," Karen insisted, her voice rising slightly. "As president, I have the authority to ensure all neighborhood resources are being utilized properly. A pool that size should not be sitting empty when community members could be enjoying it." I could not believe what I was hearing. "You have been trespassing on my property," I said firmly. "I need you to stop using my pool immediately." Karen laughed, actually laughed, as if I had just told her the most ridiculous joke she had ever heard. Trespassing? Honey, you clearly do not understand how homeowners associations work. Maybe you should attend a meeting sometime and educate yourself. She started to close the door, but I put my hand out to stop her. I am serious about this, Karen. Stay out of my backyard and away from my pool. Or what? She challenged, her eyes flashing with defiance. You will call the police? Good luck explaining to them why you are trying to monopolize community resources. The door slammed in my face, leaving me standing on her porch feeling like I had just entered some kind of alternate reality where private property rights did not exist. Over the next few weeks, Karen's behavior escalated dramatically. Not only did she continue using my pool, but she became more brazen about it. She started showing up earlier in the day, sometimes bringing friends along for impromptu pool parties. I would come home to find multiple towels scattered around, empty beverage cans floating in the water, and clear evidence that several people had been using my pool as their personal country club. I installed a security camera system and put new locks on my gates, but Karen seemed to view these as minor inconveniences rather than deterrents. She found ways around the locks and positioned herself so the cameras could not get clear shots of her face. When I tried to confront her again, she would simply wave dismissively and continue with whatever she was doing. The situation reached a boiling point when I discovered that Karen had given other homeowners association members keys to my gate. I came home one Saturday to find 6 people I had never met before having a full-blown pool party in my backyard. They had brought their own music, food, and beverages and were treating my property like it was the neighborhood recreation center. When I asked them to leave, they looked at me like I was the unreasonable one. One woman actually had the nerve to tell me that Karen had assured them the pool was available for homeowners association events and that I was just being difficult. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, everyone had scattered. The responding officer was sympathetic, but explained that without catching the trespassers in the act or having clear video evidence of their identities, there was not much they could do. He suggested I contact the homeowners association to file a formal complaint. That was exactly what I did, but as I should have expected, it was a complete waste of time. The homeowners association board consisted entirely of Karen's friends and allies. When I presented my case at the next monthly meeting, they listened politely but made it clear that they considered this a minor neighborly dispute rather than a serious issue. The board secretary, a woman named Linda, who seemed to hang on Karen's every word, actually suggested that I was being unneighborly by not sharing my pool with the community. She pointed out that the homeowners association fees I paid each month helped maintain the overall neighborhood, and that community spirit was one of the founding principles of Maple Grove Estates. Karen herself sat in the front row during my presentation, occasionally whispering to the people around her and shaking her head sadly, as if I were some kind of troublemaker who just did not understand how civilized people behaved. When it was her turn to respond, Karen stood up and delivered what could only be described as a character assassination disguised as a concerned neighbor's observations. I have lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, she began, her voice taking on the practiced tone of someone used to commanding attention. In that time, I have seen what happens when new residents come in and try to disrupt the community harmony we have worked so hard to build. She went on to paint me as an antisocial hermit who refused to participate in neighborhood activities and was now trying to hoard resources that could benefit everyone. She mentioned my failure to attend community events, my reluctance to volunteer for neighborhood committees, and my general standoffishness. A pool that size could provide recreation and exercise opportunities for multiple families, Karen continued, gesturing dramatically. Instead, it sits empty most of the time, while one selfish individual refuses to embrace the spirit of community sharing that makes Maple Grove Estates such a special place to live. By the time she finished, I felt like the villain in my own story. Several board members nodded along with her words, and I could see that they had already made up their minds about who was right and who was wrong in this situation. The board's final decision was to encourage both parties to work together to find a neighborly solution that benefits everyone. In practical terms, this meant they were going to do absolutely nothing to stop Karen from continuing to trespass. I left that meeting feeling more frustrated than ever. It was clear that working within the system was not going to solve my problem. Karen had the homeowners association board in her pocket, and they were perfectly willing to let her continue violating my property rights as long as she wrapped it in language about community spirit and sharing. That night, I sat in my backyard staring at my pool and trying to figure out what to do next. I had already spent hundreds of dollars on locks and cameras that Karen had found ways around. I had tried reasoning with her, confronting her directly, and going through official channels. Nothing had worked. It was time to stop playing fair. The next morning, I called a pool service company and asked to speak with someone about temperature control systems. The technician who came out to my house was a friendly guy named Mike who had been in the pool business for over 20 years. When I explained my situation, he listened with growing amusement. "So, let me get this straight," Mike said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "This lady has been using your pool without permission. The homeowners association will not help you, and you want to make sure she has a very unpleasant experience the next time she tries to take a swim?" "That is exactly right," I confirmed. "But I need it to be completely untraceable and look like normal pool equipment malfunctions." Mike grinned. "Oh, I have got just the thing for you. Have you ever heard of a variable temperature control system?" He went on to explain how modern pool heaters could be equipped with remote controls and programmable settings that would allow me to adjust the water temperature instantly from inside my house. The system he had in mind could make the water scalding hot or ice cold within minutes, and it would look like standard pool equipment to anyone who did not know what they were looking at. "The beauty of it," Mike explained, "is that the temperature changes can be triggered remotely, so you can wait until someone is actually in the pool before activating it. And since pool heaters do malfunction sometimes, no one would be able to prove it was intentional." The installation took 2 days and cost me more than I'd planned to spend, but I considered it an investment in my sanity and property rights. Mike showed me how to operate the remote control system and how to program different temperature settings. We tested it several times to make sure everything worked perfectly. Just remember, Mike cautioned as he packed up his tools. Pool water takes a few minutes to change temperature completely, so timing is important. And try not to get too carried away with this thing. You want to discourage trespassing, not cause actual harm. I assured him that my intentions were purely defensive and that I would use the system responsibly. What I did not mention was how much I was looking forward to seeing Karen's reaction the next time she decided to help herself to my pool. I did not have to wait long. 2 days after the installation was complete, I was working from home when I spotted Karen approaching my backyard gate. She was wearing her usual pool outfit and carrying a large beach bag, clearly planning to settle in for an extended swim session. I grabbed the remote control and positioned myself at the kitchen window where I would have a clear view of the pool. Karen went through her usual routine of unlocking the gate, setting up her towels and belongings, and then preparing to enter the water. The moment she stepped onto the pool ladder, I activated the ice-cold setting. It took about 30 seconds for the water temperature to drop significantly, which meant Karen had enough time to lower herself waist-deep into the pool before the full effect hit her. The reaction was even better than I had hoped for. Karen's relaxed expression instantly transformed into a mask of shock and confusion. She stood up quickly, shivering and looking around as if trying to figure out what had gone wrong. She dipped her hand back into the water several more times, apparently unable to believe that the temperature had changed so dramatically. After a few minutes of testing the water and muttering to herself, Karen gathered up her things and left. I could see her looking back at the pool with a puzzled expression, clearly trying to understand what had happened. Over the next week, Karen tried to use my pool 3 more times, and each attempt ended with her leaving confused and frustrated. Sometimes I made the water freezing cold, other times I made it uncomfortably hot. Once, I waited until she had been swimming for about 10 minutes before changing the temperature, which resulted in her scrambling out of the pool and standing on the deck looking completely bewildered. The beauty of the system was that it was completely unpredictable from Karen's perspective. She could not figure out any pattern or identify any external cause for the temperature changes. Pool heaters do malfunction sometimes, and there was no way for her to prove that someone was controlling the temperature deliberately. I could see that the uncertainty was driving her crazy. Karen was a woman who liked to be in control of every situation, and my pool had become an unsolvable mystery that challenged her sense of authority and understanding. After about 2 weeks of temperature surprises, Karen stopped coming around as frequently. When she did show up, She would test the water temperature with her hand before getting in, but since I never knew exactly when she would arrive, I could still catch her off guard. The psychological effect seemed to be working perfectly. Karen's confidence was shaken, and she was no longer treating my pool like her personal playground. She had become wary and suspicious, which was exactly what I had hoped to achieve. But Karen was not the type of person to give up easily, and I should have known that she would eventually try to turn the situation to her advantage. About a month after I installed the temperature control system, I received a formal letter from the Homeowners Association. The letter, signed by Karen as president, stated that several residents had raised concerns about the safety and maintenance of my pool. It went on to say that the Homeowners Association had received reports of equipment malfunctions that could pose a danger to the community. The letter demanded that I allow a Homeowners Association inspection of my pool equipment and threatened fines if I did not comply within 30 days. It was obvious that Karen was trying to use her position to force her way onto my property and investigate what was causing the temperature problems. I showed the letter to a lawyer friend of mine, who confirmed what I suspected. The Homeowners Association had no legal authority to inspect my private pool equipment unless there was evidence of a genuine safety hazard that affected other properties. Karen was overstepping her authority and hoping I would be intimidated into compliance. Instead of responding to the letter directly, I decided to let Karen continue to struggle with the mystery while I documented everything she was doing. I had hours of security footage showing her trespassing on my property, and I was building a solid case for harassment and illegal entry. Karen's frustration became more visible over the following weeks. I would see her pacing around her front yard, talking animatedly on her phone, and occasionally walking past my house to glare at the backyard. She had also started approaching other neighbors, apparently trying to build support for her theory that my pool was somehow dangerous. The situation reached a crescendo when Karen decided to organize what she called a safety inspection of neighborhood pools. She sent out flyers announcing that the Homeowners Association would be conducting voluntary inspections to ensure all pool equipment was functioning properly and safely. Of course, there was nothing voluntary about Karen's plan. She intended to use the inspection as an excuse to examine my pool equipment and figure out what was causing the temperature irregularities. When I politely declined to participate in her inspection program, she became openly hostile. Karen started showing up at my front door at all hours, demanding to speak with me about pool safety. She left threatening notes in my mailbox and even tried to enlist other neighbors to pressure me into cooperating with her investigation. One evening, I found her in my backyard again, but this time she was not there to swim. She was examining the pool equipment with a flashlight, clearly trying to identify anything that looked unusual or out of place. When she spotted me watching her from the kitchen window, she did not even have the decency to look embarrassed. Instead, she marched over to the window and started shouting about Homeowners Association authority and community safety standards. I let her rant for a few minutes before calmly informing her that she was trespassing and that I had the entire encounter on video. That seemed to give her pause, but only for a moment. Karen was in too deep to back down now, and her obsession with my pool had become a matter of personal pride rather than community concern. I realized that the temperature control system, while effective at discouraging Karen's swimming activities, had not actually solved the underlying problem. If anything, it had escalated the conflict and made Karen more determined than ever to assert her imagined authority over my property. It was time for the final phase of my plan. Karen's breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon in early summer. I was inside working on some paperwork when I heard multiple voices coming from my backyard. Looking out the window, I saw Karen leading a group of about 8 people toward my pool area. She had apparently decided that the best way to prove her point about community access was to organize an impromptu pool party on my property. The group included several Homeowners Association board members and their families, all carrying towels, coolers, and pool toys. I watched in amazement as Karen unlocked my gate and began directing people to set up their belongings around my pool. She was acting like the host of the event, pointing out where people should put their things and explaining the pool rules as if she owned the place. This was my moment. I had never caught Karen red-handed with so many witnesses before, and I was finally going to have the evidence I needed to end this ridiculous situation once and for all. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I walked outside to confront the group. Several of Karen's guests looked uncomfortable when they saw me approaching, clearly realizing that something was not right about the situation. "Excuse me," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is private property, and you are all trespassing. I need you to leave immediately." Karen stepped forward with a triumphant smile, clearly believing that she had finally cornered me in front of witnesses who would support her version of events. "As I have explained to you before," she announced dramatically, "this pool falls under Homeowners Association jurisdiction. We are here for a community safety inspection and social event." "This is my private property," I replied, still recording everything. "You have no authority here, and I am asking you to leave." Several of Karen's guests were already gathering their belongings and heading toward the gate, obviously uncomfortable with the confrontation. But Karen was not finished with her performance. "Everyone stay right where you are," she commanded, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used at Homeowners Association meetings. "This man is trying to intimidate you into giving up your community rights." To prove her point, Karen walked over to the pool and prepared to get in, apparently intending to demonstrate her claimed authority by taking a swim in front of everyone. It was perfect timing. The moment Karen lowered herself into the pool, I activated the ice-cold setting on my remote control. The water temperature had been sitting at a comfortable 82 degrees, but within seconds it began dropping rapidly toward freezing. Karen had enough time to immerse herself completely and begin swimming toward the center of the pool before the temperature change hit her. When it did, her reaction was spectacular. She let out a shriek that could probably be heard 3 blocks away and began thrashing around in the water like she was being attacked by an invisible sea monster. The shock of the sudden temperature change caused her to lose her coordination, and she began flailing helplessly as she tried to swim back to the shallow end. Her guests stood around the pool in stunned silence, watching their fearless leader struggle with water that had apparently turned to liquid ice in a matter of seconds. A few people started toward the pool to help her, but Karen was screaming incoherently and splashing so violently that they were afraid to get too close. By the time Karen managed to haul herself out of the pool, she was shivering uncontrollably and her lips had turned blue. She stood on the pool deck wrapped in a towel, shaking and staring at the water with a look of complete bewilderment. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice chattering from the cold. "What did you do to the water?" "I did not do anything," I replied innocently, still recording her meltdown. "Pool heaters malfunction sometimes. Maybe you should have had that safety inspection you were talking about." The crowd of guests had backed away from the pool and were looking at Karen with expressions that ranged from concern to embarrassment. Whatever authority she had claimed over the situation had evaporated along with her dignity. One of the Homeowners Association board members, a man named Frank who had always seemed uncomfortable with Karen's more aggressive tactics, stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Karen, I think we should go," he said quietly. This does not seem like the right time or place for this discussion. But Karen was not ready to admit defeat. She was still shivering and blue-lipped, but her anger was overriding her physical discomfort. "He sabotaged the pool," she shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. "He deliberately did something to make the water cold because he knew we were coming." "How could I have known you were coming?" I asked reasonably. "You did not exactly send out invitations for your trespassing party." Several of her guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, and I could see that they were beginning to question Karen's version of events. The situation was clearly not what she had described to them, and they were starting to realize that they had been manipulated into participating in something questionable. Karen must have sensed that she was losing her audience, because she made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "This pool is a community hazard," she declared, her voice rising to near hysteria levels. "The equipment is obviously malfunctioning, and someone could be seriously injured. As Homeowners Association president, I am declaring this pool closed until a proper safety inspection can be completed." That was when I decided to play my trump card. "Actually, Karen," I said calmly, "since you keep talking about Homeowners Association authority, let me read you something." I pulled out a copy of the neighborhood covenants and restrictions that I had been carrying in my back pocket for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. According to Section 12 of the Homeowners Association bylaws, I read aloud, "Private recreational facilities located entirely on individual lots remain under the sole control and authority of the property owner. The homeowners association has no jurisdiction over private pools, spas, or similar amenities. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Karen's guests were staring at her with expressions of shock and betrayal, clearly realizing that she had been lying to them about her authority over my pool. Frank, the board member who had tried to defuse the situation earlier, looked particularly uncomfortable. "Karen, is this true?" he asked quietly. "Do we actually have no authority over private pools?" Karen's face went through several different colors as she struggled to come up with an explanation that would salvage her position. "Well, that section is open to interpretation," she stammered. "Community safety concerns override individual property rights in certain circumstances." "No, they do not," I interrupted, still recording everything. "And even if they did, you would need to go through proper legal channels, not organize vigilante pool parties on my property." By this point, most of Karen's guests had heard enough. They began gathering their belongings and heading toward the gate, clearly wanting to distance themselves from what was rapidly becoming a legal nightmare. Karen watched her support group abandoning her and made one final desperate play for sympathy. "Fine," she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "Everyone, go ahead and leave. But when someone gets hurt because of this dangerous pool equipment, do not come crying to me." She stormed toward the gate, still wrapped in her towel and shivering, but before she could make her dramatic exit, I called out to her. "Karen, wait. There is one more thing." She turned around with a look of hope, probably thinking I was going to apologize or offer some kind of compromise. Instead, I held up my phone and smiled. "I just want you to know that I have been recording this entire conversation, and I also have security camera footage of you trespassing on my property multiple times over the past several months. I will be turning all of this evidence over to the police on Monday morning." The color drained from Karen's face as the full implications of what I had said sank in. She opened her mouth to say something, then apparently thought better of it, and hurried through the gate without another word. Her remaining guests followed quickly behind, and within minutes my backyard was empty again, except for a few scattered pool toys and the lingering scent of coconut sunscreen. I stood there for a moment, savoring the silence and the knowledge that I had finally, definitively won this ridiculous battle. But I was not quite finished yet. On Monday morning, I made good on my promise and filed a formal complaint with the police. I had hours of security footage showing Karen trespassing on my property, recordings of her admitting to using my pool without permission, and video evidence of her organizing an unauthorized gathering on my land. The police officer who took my statement seemed genuinely amazed by the extent of Karen's behavior. "So, let me make sure I understand this," he said, reviewing my evidence. "This woman has been using your pool without permission for months, claimed homeowners association authority she does not actually have, and then organized a group trespassing event on your property." "That is correct," I confirmed. "And I have documentation proving all of it." The officer nodded and began filling out the paperwork for criminal trespass and harassment charges. "We will need to interview some of the witnesses from Saturday's incident," he said. "Do you have contact information for any of the people who were present?" I provided him with the names and addresses of several homeowners association board members who had witnessed Karen's meltdown, and he assured me that the case would be taken seriously. Within a week, Karen had been formally charged with criminal trespass and harassment. The local newspaper picked up the story, and soon the entire neighborhood was talking about the homeowners association president who had been arrested for illegal pool parties. The homeowners association board called an emergency meeting to address the situation, and Karen was asked to resign her position immediately. She tried to claim that the whole thing was a misunderstanding and that she had been acting in the community's best interests, but the board members who had witnessed Saturday's debacle were not buying it. Frank, who had been Karen's most loyal supporter, was particularly vocal in calling for her resignation. "Karen, you told us we had authority over private pools when you knew that was not true," he said during the meeting. "You used your position to mislead board members and residents, and now the homeowners association could face legal liability for your actions." Faced with potential lawsuits and complete loss of support from her former allies, Karen had no choice but to step down. She submitted her resignation letter the next day, citing health issues and personal circumstances that prevented her from continuing in her leadership role. But even that was not the end of Karen's troubles. Several of the people who had participated in her unauthorized pool party were now facing potential legal issues of their own. And they were not happy about being dragged into Karen's scheme. At least 2 of them were considering filing their own complaints against her for misrepresentation and fraud. Karen's reputation in the neighborhood was completely destroyed. People who had once respected her leadership were now questioning everything she had ever told them about homeowners association policies and community standards. She had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and personal entitlement. As for me, I was finally able to enjoy my pool in peace. I installed a 10-foot privacy fence around my entire backyard and upgraded my security system to ensure that no one would ever again be able to access my property without permission. The temperature control system remained in place, partly as a safeguard against future trespassers and partly because I had grown fond of being able to adjust the water temperature from inside my house. Mike, the pool technician who had installed it, stopped by a few weeks later to check on how everything was working. "So how did your problem with the trespassing neighbor work out?" he asked with a knowing grin. "Let me put it this way," I replied. "She will not be using anyone's pool without permission ever again." Mike laughed and began packing up his tools. "You know," he said casually, "there is actually a setting on that system that creates random temperature spikes throughout the day. It is designed for therapeutic purposes, but it could also serve as a deterrent against unwanted swimmers. Want me to show you how to activate it?" I considered his offer for a moment, thinking about all the stress and frustration Karen had caused me over the past several months. The memory of her standing on my pool deck, shivering and humiliated, brought a sense of satisfaction that I had not felt in months. "Show me," I said without hesitation. Mike pulled out his tablet and began programming the new settings. "This feature will create temperature variations every few hours," he explained. "Nothing dangerous, just enough to make the water uncomfortable for anyone who might be tempted to take an unauthorized swim. The changes happen gradually, so it looks completely natural." As he worked, I found myself thinking about how different my life had become since moving to Maple Grove Estates. What had started as a dream of peaceful suburban living had turned into a months-long battle with an entitled neighbor who believed the rules did not apply to her. The whole experience had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself and not backing down when someone tries to walk all over you. The legal proceedings against Karen were still ongoing, but her lawyer had already reached out about a possible settlement. Apparently, she was eager to avoid a trial that would make her behavior even more public than it already was. The local newspaper had run a follow-up story about the case, and Karen had become something of a neighborhood celebrity for all the wrong reasons. I had also learned that Karen's problems extended beyond just my pool. Other neighbors had started coming forward with their own stories about her overstepping boundaries and abusing her position as homeowners association president. There were reports of her entering people's garages without permission, rearranging their outdoor decorations, and even lecturing residents about their landscaping choices while standing uninvited in their front yards. The new Homeowners Association Board was now reviewing all of Karen's past decisions and policies, many of which had been implemented without proper authority or community input. It turned out that her interpretation of the neighborhood rules had been far more expansive than what was actually written in the official documents. "There we go," Mike said, finishing up the programming. "The system is now set to create random temperature fluctuations between 75 and 90 degrees throughout the day. It will look like normal equipment cycling to anyone who does not know better." I tested the new settings from my kitchen window, watching as the pool temperature display showed the gradual changes Mike had programmed. It was subtle but effective, creating an environment that would be uncomfortable for extended swimming without appearing obviously manipulated. "Perfect," I said, shaking Mike's hand as he prepared to leave. "I think this will ensure my pool remains private property." As Mike drove away, I stood in my backyard and looked at the pool that had caused so much trouble. The afternoon sun was reflecting off the water's surface, creating dancing patterns of light that reminded me why I had fallen in love with this house in the first place. For the first time in months, I felt truly at peace in my own backyard. Karen's house was visible in the distance, and I noticed that the for sale sign that had appeared in her front yard the previous week was still there. According to neighborhood gossip, she was planning to move away from Maple Grove Estates entirely, unable to face the daily reminders of her public humiliation. I could not say I was sorry to see her go. The neighborhood would be a much more peaceful place without her constant interference and manufactured drama. The new Homeowners Association president was a retired teacher named Margaret, who actually seemed to understand the difference between community leadership and personal dictatorship. "Just in case," I said. "You never know when it might come in handy."